Welcome back, everybody. I am Brian Lee Durfee, author of The Forgetting Moon and The Blackest Heart, and the upcoming Lonesome Crown, all three published by Simon & Schuster's Saga Press. Today, I'm going to be reviewing one of the best Western novels I've read in a long time, and that is Long Ride Home by W. Michael Geer. Now, maybe some of you have seen me review other W. Michael Geer novels on the channel. You know, I reviewed Warriors of Spider. Gave it a good review. Now, I've met W. Michael Geer, and, you know, whenever I name drop and I show you the books that I've got signed. So he's signed quite a lot of my books. And I've got all of his science fiction books. And not only that, but I've just this month been collecting all of his Westerns. And he's got a lot of Westerns that he wrote with his wife, Kathleen O'Neill. So I want to show you the books of his that I bought this month. They're going to be on my book haul for the month of May 2021. And these are I bought a shit ton of these W. Michael Geer Westerns here. You can see them down there. Got a bunch of them. Then we got the W. Michael Geer and Kathleen M. O'Neill Geer we got the whole series I got. So I spent a lot of money and got about 30 different Michael Geer and Kathleen M. O'Neill Geer Westerns this month. And I'm glad I did, because this Western, Long Ride Home, like I said, one of the best I've read in a long time. I mean, you know I love Lonesome Dove. You know I love Louis L'Amour and Zane Grey and, you know, Terry C. Johnstone and Tony Hillerman, and I could go on with the Western writers I love. One of the things that I noticed about Long Ride Home is I was like, that's a familiar title. That's a familiar title. Then I'm like, well, Louis L'Amour has a book called Long Ride Home too, which I've left a review. You can see my review of this Louis L'Amour book on my channel. Okay, let's get to this book, because I really want to talk about this book, folks. This is the darkest Western I've read since I watched the Clint Eastwood movie, The Unforgiven. That is what I compare this to most. So if you like, you know, a lot of the Louis L'Amour books are PG, a lot of the Zane Grey books are PG. Larry McMurtry and Lonesome Dove, we get into some rated R stuff, but it's just not that dark. This is one of the darkest Westerns I have ever read. I mean, this thing is grim, cynical. It's got character that's just tortured. Let me talk about this here. Our main guy, this was written in, just a little history on this book. It was written in 1988. And it came out about the same time as his science fiction debut, Warriors of Spider. So his Western debut and his science fiction debut came out about the same time, 1988. So this is a very early novel of his. And his sci-fi books are pretty grim and dark. And I'm telling you, this thing, it's about Theo Belk. Starts in 1874. As a matter of fact, the whole thing takes place in 1874. There is a little bit of a flashback scene to where Theo Belk remembers that his parents were brutally murdered by Louis Gascon and the French plantation owner Louis Gascon and the French mountain man Sabat. So he watches his parents get gruesomely murdered. And I'm telling you, folks, just from the get-go, right? That's right there in the first few pages. We get one of the most brutally described murders I've ever read in a Western novel. In fact, that I've ever read in any novel. And it's like, this little boy watches his parents get just murdered like this. And it is gruesome. And then he grows up with this idea that he's going to gain revenge on these two men that killed his parents. And so that's the basis of the plot. And he goes through a lot in his life. So That happens right in the first few pages. Then we bounce to when he's an adult, and he's gone through a lot in the interim. And he just talks about it in flashbacks where he's fallen in love. He's chased these men across the country, right? He's chased these two killers across the country, spent his whole life seeking revenge, chasing these guys. But in the meantime, he's come across some relationships. He's had bad relationships. He fell in love with a girl named Liz. He found out that Liz didn't really like him. And then so in a murderous rage, he killed her new lover. I mean, the guy, Theo Belk, our main character, he's not a good guy. In fact, he's suffering from PTSD, severe PTSD from watching his parents get murdered as a child. That's one of the reasons I think this book is brilliant, is because we've got this gunslinger, Theo Belk, who is, you want him to be the hero and get his revenge, but you can also see that he's a dark, murderous man himself. That's why I compare this to the movie The Unforgiven, is because even though we're kind of rooting for the Clint Eastwood character in The Unforgiven, we also know that he's a bad man in his own right. And should we really be rooting for him? Should we really be rooting for Theo Belk? Because he cold-bloodedly murdered the new boyfriend of a girl he liked. And that just is a bad stuff, right? And not only that, but Theo is he's haunted by what happened to his parents. PTSD. He suffers from a lot of mental trauma and illness. In fact, he is mentally ill. You can clearly see that because he thinks the demon's chasing him all the time. So we've got this really dark gunslinger, right? This really, really dark gunslinger where he thinks that devils and demons are on his back. He literally believes that ghosts and spirits haunt him. And he's running from them. At the same time, he's chasing these two guys, Gascon and Sabat, who killed his parents. And then we get chapters that are told from the perspective of the two men that killed his parents, Gascon and Sabat. We get perspective of them. And they're not good people. And then we get perspective of a character named, what was her name? Dolly Moore. And she is like a young, voluptuous, red-haired girl, and she's traveling out west with her father, and they're very inexperienced in the West. They're going to get themselves killed pretty quickly, but Theo Belk, our main gunslinger, he kind of finds them in the wilderness and helps them to safety. And, you think that there's going to be, this is going to be, Dolly Moore is going to be the one that sort of saves Theo from himself, saves him from the darkness, because he's just a mysterious, dark gunslinger, right? And and you think that's the way the story's going to go. And I'm telling you, I don't want to give any other things away, but there's another girl that shows up named Ruby, and things go in very, very dark directions all throughout. Nothing is what it seems. Every twist you don't see coming, because you think that in these westerns things are going to play out in a certain order, and the guy's always going to get the girl he wants, and then if there's a love triangle, it's going to kind of work itself out, and things go just to shit in a handcart. And I'm going to tell you, one of the most unexpected gut punch endings I've ever read in a book, and I just thought this thing was dynamite. I can't recommend it enough. If you like westerns, if Louis L'Amour is a little too rated PG for you, if Zane Grey is a little too PG, and you want something more along the lines of Lonesome Dove or The Unforgiven or something really dark, Long Ride Home by W. Michael Gere. This book is freaking great. Great, great, great. And the history we get of Theo Belk, where he's... Another thing that I want to mention, if you want to stick with me, is Theo Belk, he's raised by Mormons. So his parents get killed. That's one of the things that I didn't talk about in his backstory, which is pretty important to the plot. His parents are killed when he's young, and he's kind of taken in by the Mormons, and the Mormons don't treat him well. And that's another thing about the Old West, is the Mormons make such great villains, and they do so in this book too. And it all ties together. And I just thought it was a great, great Western novel. unexpected. I was not expecting much out of this, and it over delivered in a big way. I give this a 9 out of 10. I just think it's great.